I'm Mrs. Franklin. I teach government at West High School, and this is KCS at Home, the summer edition. This is 10th grade U.S. Government and Civics, and today we'll be walking through Task 5 on civil liberties. If this video is hard to understand, you can turn on closed captions if available, adjust the playback speed to slow down the video. Both of these options are available in the settings for the video. You could also consider watching short clips, then pause, listen, and watch again, or ask someone in your home to watch the video with you. Stop frequently and talk to your partner about what you heard and understood. Today, you'll need your KCS at Home Civil Liberties Assignment page, which is task number 5 on the KCS at Home website, and a piece of notebook paper. First, you should read through the assignment and make sure you can access all the links. In this box, you'll see all of the standards for the Civil Liberties module. We won't go through many of these cases today, but we will talk about each of the amendments mentioned in each of the standards. For GC 23, we'll be talking about the freedoms of the First Amendment. In GC 24, we'll talk about the Second Amendment and its various interpretations. In 25, we'll talk about the 4th through 8th Amendments. 26, we'll talk about the interpretations of the freedoms in the 14th Amendment. We will be discussing Plessy v. Ferguson and Brown v. Board of Education today. And then for GC 27, we'll identify and explain legislation and legal precedents that establish rights for the underserved. In this lesson today, you will read an article about constitutional rights, another article about the civil rights movement. You will complete an activity that goes with each of those articles, and then you will play a game to test your knowledge of constitutional rights. Finally, you'll answer this question that's used the content you learned from the lesson, which says, how does the Constitution and the Supreme Court's interpretation of it balance the protection of our individual rights and liberties with maintaining the public order? When you're ready, go ahead and click the first link to begin. It should take you to this article. As you read, you should take notes on your notebook paper on the argument between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists and what is an amendment. Let's look at the article together so I can show you where everything is. Here, you'll see the You've Got Rights article. It talks about our beginnings as a country and the argument between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists over the ratification of the Constitution. Then it goes on to talk about what an amendment is and how we've added many amendments to our Constitution over time. Go ahead and read this article and take notes, and when you're finished, come back to the video and we'll talk about it together. Now that you've read the Civil Liberties reading, go ahead and click the next link for the Civil Rights reading. You should see this article called The Road to Civil Rights. As you read, take notes on your notebook paper on the difference between discrimination, segregation, and prejudice, what the civil rights movement was, what strategies the leaders of the movement used, and what some laws and court cases that helped the civil rights movement were. Let's look at it together. In the beginning of this article, you'll find the difference in discrimination, segregation, and prejudice. You'll talk about what the civil rights movement was, who some key leaders of the movement were, and the tactics they used in order to achieve their success. On the next page, it talks about the presidential leadership and how that helped the civil rights movement, and some laws and court cases that advanced the cause of the civil rights movement. It also talks about folks that opposed the civil rights movement. Go ahead and read this and take notes. Pause this video, and when you're done, come back and we'll talk about it together. By reading these two articles, you should have learned that the Federalists and Anti-Federalists were two groups that argued about whether we should have individual rights included in the Constitution. To compromise, they agreed on the Bill of Rights, which were added as amendments or additions to the Constitution. In the Civil Rights article, you learn that prejudice, meaning intolerance, can lead to discrimination or unequal treatment against African Americans, and sometimes segregation, which is forced separation. The civil rights movement began to end these practices. They used tactics like sit-ins, marches, and boycotts, and some victories of the civil rights movement were the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which banned discrimination in public accommodations, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which ended literacy tests and poll taxes, and the Brown versus the Board of Education, which ended segregation in schools. After you've read your articles and taken notes, you can click on the next two links to apply your knowledge. To complete these activities, you can either print them out, write your answers on notebook paper, or download the attachments and type your responses into the PDFs. I'll show you what these assignments are first, and then you can pause the video to complete them. For the first activity called You've Got Rights, you will complete this sheet. You'll categorize the freedoms that are found in the Bill of Rights into these different categories based on our constitutional liberties. Then you will compare and contrast the beliefs of the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists using this Venn diagram and sort these into this section. Finally, you will imagine what it would be like if we didn't have these amendments and talk about some examples of things that could happen if the 6th, 4th, 8th, and 1st Amendments were not in the Constitution. After you finish the You've Got Rights activity, you should move on to the Road to Civil Rights activity. For the Road to Civil Rights activity, you will start with a vocabulary matching where you will match the word to its definition. Then you will identify what type of protest is taking place in each of these scenarios. You will also find out which of these organizations is represented here using this word bank. You'll identify the leaders of the civil rights movement, and then you will help to decide what story was caused by the problem listed in this column that leads to the Supreme Court decision listed in this column. You will then complete this geography activity where you will identify key cities in the civil rights movement that are geography stars. Go ahead and complete these 2 activities. Pause the video, and when you're finished, come back to the video and we'll go over them together. Welcome back. Now that you've completed the You've Got Rights and Road to Civil Rights activities, we'll go ahead and discuss the answers together. First, you had to find the rights that were in amendments and categorize them in these different sections, okay? 1A says the freedom to practice religion, any religion or no religion, goes in this section under Bill of Rights, okay, under individual liberties, individual freedoms. 2 says the right to assemble peacefully, okay, or 1B also goes in this individual freedoms section. Number 2 says the right to keep and bear arms, which is Second Amendment, okay, that's also going to go into the individual freedoms category. Number 4 says no unreasonable searches and seizures by the government. That's going to go into the limits on government category. 5A says no government can take a person's life, liberty, or property without due process of law. That is going to go under the rights of the accused category. 5B says no person can be tried twice for the same crime. That is also going to go into the rights of the accused category. And then 5C says the government can't take private property without compensation. That will go into the limits on government category. 6A says people accused of crimes have right to a speedy trial. That will go into the rights of the accused. 6B says people accused of crimes have the right to a lawyer. That will also go into the rights of the accused. Number 8 says no cruel and unusual punishments. Another one under rights of the accused. And 9 says rights listed in the Constitution aren't the only rights people have. That is also going to go in limits on government. Okay, it's going to say the government can't take away rights even though they're not listed. 13 says slavery should not exist in the United States. This is going to go into the later amendments under natural rights. 15 says people have the right to vote regardless of race. That'll go under later amendments and voting rights. And then 19 says women can vote. Okay, and that again will go under later amendments and voting rights. Next, you had to sort the beliefs of the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, and then you had to say whether they belonged to Federalists, Anti-Federalists, or if they were shared. Okay. A says feared a strong central government. This is going to go under Anti-Federalist. B says thought the Constitution was enough to protect citizens' rights. That will go under Federalist. C says agreed to the Bill of Rights as a compromise. Since they compromised on it, that's going to be both of them because they had to work together towards that compromise. D says wanted a list of rights to be seen as the only they worried that a list of rights would be seen as the only rights that people had, and that's going under the Federalist. That was their argument against the Bill of Rights. E says thought the Constitution needed a lot of protected rights, and that's going to go under Anti-Federalist. F says oppose the Constitution. That's going to go under Anti-Federalist. G says believe citizens have rights that should be protected. They both think that they should be protected. They just have different ideas of how they would protect them. And then H says wanted the Constitution to be approved as is, and that's going to be the Federalists. The last section is really up to your imagination. You had to imagine what it would be like if we didn't have the Sixth Amendment, which guarantees us a trial by a jury and an attorney and a speedy trial. You had to imagine what it would be like if we didn't have the protection against unlawful searches and seizures, or if we didn't have the protection against cruel and unusual punishment or unjust bail and fines. You also could have had to imagine what it would be like if we didn't have the protections of our freedoms of speech, press, petition, religion, or assembly. So your answers will vary here. Let's go on to the next one. Now we're going to go over the Road to Civil Rights assignment. First is the vocabulary matching. You had to match the word with its definition. So activist is a C, a person who protests to call attention to a cause like civil rights. Segregation is E, keeping things or people separate. Nonviolent is D, it means peaceful. Discrimination is A, when one group is treated different than another group. Integration is F, bringing separate groups together. And prejudice is B, intolerance of a person or group based on their race. In this section, you had to identify what type of protest was happening here. The first one is talking about a boycott. The second one is a sit-in. The third one is a march. And then the fourth scenario is a voter registration drive. Then you had to fill in the blanks using the word bank. SNCC was the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. CORE was the Congress on Racial Equality. The SCLC was the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. The NAACP is the National Association of the Advancement of Colored People. And the COFO is the Council of Federated Organization. Okay, that's a combination of other groups. Then you had to decide which of the civil rights leaders was represented in the quote, okay? The first one on the left side was Rosa Parks. Beneath her is Malcolm X. Going back up to the top is Thurgood Marshall. Then you have Lyndon Johnson, and then you have Linda Brown, okay? And then here you can see the lines that they have drawn between the story, the problem, and the Supreme Court solution. The last thing you had to do was identify some major cities in the civil rights movement. Montgomery, Alabama is over here. Then we have Atlanta, Georgia, which is a key place. Greensboro, North Carolina is up here. Jackson, Mississippi is down here. Washington, D.C. is over here. Selma, Alabama is over here next to Montgomery. And Memphis, Tennessee is over here. And you can read about why each of these places are important. Now you're going to play a game. The last link on the page goes to a game called Do I Have a Right, in which you will be a lawyer helping clients decide if they have rights. Let's go ahead and look at this together. That last link will take you to a website called Civics and a game called Do I Have a Right. You may have to click here to enable Flash Player. I've already enabled Flash Player on mine, but that might be an option that you have. Go ahead and click play. Pop up. It asks you to sign into your account or register for a new one. You don't have to have an account to use anything on iCivics, so I'm going to click no thanks. But if you want to, if you have an account, you can log in so it can track your progress, or if you want to make one, you're welcome to do that. I'm going to click no thanks and move on. It's going to pull up the game Do I Have a Right? Here, you can control the volume or other settings and turn the sound on or off, and then you can look at other settings. You can also play the game in Spanish. Click on New Game and go ahead and start. Pause the video, and when you're finished, come back and we'll talk about it together. Now that you've read the articles, completed the activities, and played the game, you should be ready to answer this question on your notebook paper. It says, how does the Constitution and the Supreme Court's interpretation of it balance the protection of our individual rights and liberties with maintaining public order? You can answer this question in paragraph form, or you can make a list of the ways that the Constitution and the Supreme Court's interpretation do this balancing. Go ahead and pause the video so you can write your answer. Today, you should have learned the Bill of Rights is made up of the first 10 amendments and gives us protection from the government taking away our rights. During the 1950s and 60s, the Civil Rights Movement took those protections a step further and won victories for African Americans in the areas of voting rights and banning segregation and discrimination in public places. Thanks for watching KCS at Home. I hope